Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the arrival of the Superintendent of the United States Naval Academy. Attention on deck.
Okay, please everybody sit down. That was more than enough. All right, good morning. Welcome back to the Naval Academy, especially for all of our delegates. I know that was a real challenge to get this thing rolling with the weather. I am absolutely thrilled to have as many of you here as we were able to get. I think we're well over 70 different institutions that we have delegates from, something on the order of about 130 of the 200 that we had hoped to have. And a lot of our distinguished panelists and guest speakers, virtually all of them have made it. Mr. Chris Inglis, how about that speech last night? Was that not terrific? How about a round of applause for that? You know, this conference has been going on now since 1984. So 34 years now we've been doing this here, and we're very proud to put this on. The Naval Academy here in Annapolis, Maryland is now enjoying its 170th year as an institution. And amongst all the many distinguished graduates that we've had, Mr. Mitch Hart and Linda from the class of 1956, they're two of the primary beneficiaries that put this on for us, as well as the great members of the class of 1938. And there's a lot of detail in your program about the class of 1938, something on the order of about 421 World War II veterans, 24 Navy Crosses, 70 Silver Stars, 146 Bronze Stars, 44 Distinguished Flying Crosses. 4 of them went on to be POWs. So although we don't have members of that class here to applaud, we should think about them because their class and their generosity has a lot to do with this being put on. I have a couple thoughts that I'd like to pass on to you this morning to just kind of set the tone, and I'm going to really be following in some of the themes that Chris Inglis passed on to us last night. You know, the theme of this conference is referent leadership. And, you know, if you look up referent in the dictionary, you'll find a lot of different variations on what that means. As I thought about it and as our midshipmen came forward about what they want to do here, this is really about how leadership applies to you. There's a reason that we go after all the different colleges and universities to have all this youth to be here. Now, we as the older crowd that are up here speaking and talking about our life experiences, it's really great fun for us to talk about what we've learned along the way, but it's really about you. This year on January 5th, I had the opportunity to speak in Washington, D.C. about a great naval hero, Stephen Decatur. This year would have been his 237th birthday. For a lot of you that are not familiar with naval history, you've probably heard of his name because his name is a city in 46 states across the country, 7 counties. He was probably one of the most ferocious and brave fighters the Navy ever saw. He became a midshipman in 1798, well before we had a Naval Academy. He got a wonderful set of training from a British benefactor. And by the age of 22, he was a lieutenant, already in command of a ship. Now, back then, with Thomas Jefferson as our president, we were already beginning to extend our maritime borders all the way across into the Mediterranean. This idea of having to counter piracy and paying ransom to move goods and services was a big problem for our country. Stephen Decatur was part of that initial fighting, especially in East Africa. He went on to fight in many, many battles from the battles of 1812, but maybe his most famous battle happened in August of 1804. He'd already made one raid on the port harbor of Tripoli, where he saved the USS Pennsylvania and took it down. But in the second set of fighting, his brother, James Decatur, was killed in action against a Tripoli corsair. The fighting happened relatively close, and a young midshipman named McDonough found Stephen Decatur, got the fight to where this corsair was, and Stephen Decatur was the first aboard with 9 Marines and 1 midshipman named McDonough. Outnumbered 5-1, they go in hand-to-hand battle. Decatur goes up against the Tripolitan captain, defeats him in hand-to-hand combat. They killed 23 of the Tripolitans, take 3 captive, and none of the Americans were injured. It's a rather remarkable story. Decatur became a household word in the United States. He was promoted to Navy captain at the age of 25, the youngest ever promoted to that rank. Think about what you will be doing when you're 25. Now, Mr. Inglis made reference to Alfred Thayer Mahan yesterday in his remarks. We're in Mahan Hall today. Now, Mahan was a graduate here of the Naval Academy in its fledgling years in 1859. He came back here to the Naval Academy to become an instructor at a very young age in his 20s, and a lot of his thinking about the most significant strategic pieces that he wrote about in his 30s and 40s were formed right here at the Naval Academy. 25 years after he graduated, he would go on to teach at the Naval War College, became the second president of the Naval War College just 2 years after it was formed with Stephen B. Luce. And that's where his influence really started to show. Now, if you read up on Alfred Thayer Mahan, you'll find out he really wasn't particularly good in command. For all the credit we give him, he wasn't actually all that terrific at sea. But what he was good at was understanding some of the principles of leadership, understanding the importance of being a maritime power, understanding the control of choke points. And he made his influence clear at a very early age. Now, as Chris Inglis pointed out yesterday, technology is taking off at such an explosive level, it's hard to know what the next thing will be. But there's no doubt about what's important is to understand the basics of leadership. Most of that has not changed. How to take care of your people, how to be competent in your job, how to remain humble. I think back to when I graduated here in 1981. I had no idea what would be out in front of me. I went into aviation, as I got my wings of gold and I joined my first squadron, I found myself flying in the F-4 Phantom, a Vietnam-era airplane, a thing that was designed in the 50s. And if you think back to 1 September 1983, it was probably one of the culminating events of the Cold War. We talk about the Cold War events where no shots were fired. Well, actually, that's not really true, because on that day, Korean Airline 007, taking off from Anchorage, Alaska, attempting to fly to Seoul, South Korea, was shot down by a Soviet-era Su-15 Flagon. The airplane had moved about 100 miles north, and as it crossed over Soviet airspace going into the Northern Sea of Japan, the Soviet Union gave their pilot permission to shoot it down. 269 innocent lives were taken. That was the moment that I showed up in my squadron. I was 23 years old. For the next 3 years of my life, I spent most every day flying off the carrier Midway, now a museum in San Diego. I went to Top Gun in 1985. Captain Dan Dixon will be one of your speakers today. Admiral Sandy Winnefeld, who will be one of your keynotes tomorrow, was my Top Gun instructor when I was there when they were filming the movie. I know, this sounds really ancient history. But I want to relate a short story that was a game changer for me in 1984. And again, this was the height of the Cold War. Carrier operations were very dangerous. And my first deployment on USS Midway in my squadron, VF-161, we lost 3 airplanes in just my squadron. That's 15 pilots, 15 radar intercept officers. 2 of the 15 pilots were killed. So landing on a carrier was not simple business, especially in an F-4 Phantom. And I think back to just 2.5 years ago, the X-47B unmanned drone was landing on the George H.W. Bush with a thing called the Automatic Carrier Landing System. Pretty high-tech stuff. For a lot of people, it was the first time they ever knew that you could land an airplane on a carrier without anybody in it, and with this technology that can send a signal to an airplane, put an autopilot on, control, pitch and roll, throttles. Well, guess what? We were doing that stuff in the early 80s. In fact, the first automatic carrier landing system happened in 1959 at Lakehurst, and we were flying Sky Knights on aircraft carriers, the Antietam, in 1961. So I, as a young backseater in the F-4, got exposed to this system in 1983. And all of our pilots really enjoyed this. The F-4 was a very good platform to come aboard the ship with this automatic carrier landing system. I had almost 100 carrier landings, most of them touch and goes, not all tail hook down, in this system. So in the winter of 1984, I am flying with a young lieutenant. He's 2 years older than I am. He's a Citadel grad. And we're coming in after intercepting some Soviet bombers. It's at night. And for me, at that young age, I was mostly in this idea, I am a follower. I was learning from the Vietnam-era pilots that taught me the business. I had been through Top Gun. And backseaters back then did not say much about the landing process. There's no stick and throttle in the back of the F-4. And it's pilot's business to land the airplane. So on this particular night, we are coming down, and we're coming into the chute to land on the carrier at night. And we're going to use an automatic carrier landing system to land. So that means the pilot's going to be hands off, auto throttle. We're going to come in all the way in and land. We're in the Northern Sea of Japan, the same area where Korean Airline 007 had been shot down. Sea state, when we took off, was pretty steady. We came back and started to pick up a little bit. And this is where technology does not often keep up with reality. As we came down to land, less than 10 seconds from landing, about a half a mile behind the ship, the automatic carrier landing system signal got out of sync with us. The deck had sunk way down low into the water, so the system thought that we were very high to come in from land. It commanded the throttles to idle and push the nose over. So with less than 10 seconds from landing, and what had been a plan to be an automatic landing, now we're forced to go to manual control. And I could see, as I looked out my little window from the back, that from 10 seconds to 8 seconds, we are now below the level of the flight deck. Now, as a young 24-year-old at this point in my life, I know three things. Number one, there's no life below the flight deck. Number two, nobody in naval aviation history going back to 1911 has ever shelled out of an airplane successfully prior to crossing the ramp of an aircraft carrier, ever. And that's still true today, by the way. And three, if I was going to say anything to save this jet, my pilot, and me, I had about 1 or 2 seconds to do it, because everybody's going to start yelling at him, the landing signal officers on the back, the captain of the ship, everybody. So the throttles are at idle. I could feel Bob Budden, my pilot, shift the throttles to full military-rated thrust, which was a good thing. If you go to afterburning, you actually lose thrust to throw all that fuel into the afterburner cans. And all I could think of was that classic shot of an F-4 with his nose trying to climb out, going into stall speed, and we would hit the back end of the ship. So I said, push the nose over. Absolutely contrary to what my pilot wanted to do, as we are now below the level of flight deck and we're trying to climb. And to Bob's credit, he did just that. I actually felt him push the stick forward. Now, all we did was slow our rate of descent from about 1,200 feet per minute, which is like jumping off a 20-foot story building, to 600 feet per minute. And as I looked out, I could see the flight deck. And as we were crossing the ramp, I knew the main body of the airplane would cross, but I wasn't sure the landing gear would make it. So I grabbed the ejection handle. I was going to break the odds. And I was waiting for anybody to give us a vote to say eject. And if I saw a single spark, I was going to pull the handle. I don't think I've ever gripped an ejection handle so hard. And by the way, in my 35 years of flying, I've never ejected. This is the closest I ever came. The wheels of the airplane hit the round down. It's 176 feet to the first wire. The tail hook hit the back end of the midway. If you ever go on the midway, you will see where the flight deck ends and rounds down. It's exactly 6 feet. Our tail hook hit 5 feet, 11 and a half inches below the round down. Another half an inch would have sheared the hook right off. Talk about a game of inches. I felt the tail hook slam up into the airplane. I felt the airplane start to bound up as the wheels decompressed. I saw no sparks, and the tail hook went up and down as we were now riding kitty car along the flight deck. We're actually starting to get airborne, and the tail hook that caught the last and third wire on the midway. It actually pulled us down from midair, slammed us onto the deck, and we were stopped. I thought about that many times over in my life. In fact, I went on to instruct and teach pilots how to land on aircraft carriers. And my point of telling you that story was I wasn't but the same age as Stephen Decatur. I didn't do anything nearly as brave as what Decatur did. But each and every one of you will be thrown into a moment where you'll have to decide, am I transitioning from follower to leader? And it didn't hesitate to me to say, this is my moment to tell my pilot something that I can see that maybe he isn't. And if he had done anything but push that nose forward, there's no doubt I wouldn't be here talking to you. Because that airplane had fuel, live weapons on it. And by the way, we landed exactly on center line. That part of the automatic carrier landing system was working just fine. Each and every one of you is going to have your moment. Some of you will have it easily defined right early in your life. Some of you may take longer. And as wonderful as this forum is for open discussion, it's only as good as you engaging yourself. Ask questions. The amount of experience that will be up in these panels is absolutely just off the page. So take advantage of it. Enjoy the camaraderie amongst yourselves. Many of you have your own life experiences already. And I'll just say that on behalf of the entire Naval Academy, our faculty, our staff, our midshipmen, we're thrilled that you made the effort to come here. And we hope this proves beneficial to you and fruitful for the rest of your life. And get a chance to walk around the yard. I know it's a little tough right now. I think there'll be some options to go see John Paul Jones in the crypt. And a few others. Saw some people trying to get in the chapel this morning. Probably wasn't open. But things will get more open here as we get back to normal business here. So again, thank you for being here. Enjoy the conference. Enjoy the Westin Hotel. And I look forward to seeing you on the yard. Thank you all very, very much.